My name is Clare Blumer. I've been with the ABC for about 10 years in various parts, news, radio and investigations, and am now the executive producer of Triple J Hack, which is a youth current affairs program. We were also going to be joined today by the author of Facts and Other Lies, Ed Coper, but unfortunately he went down with a spicy cough. So we're a little bit smaller today, but we've got a lot to cover, and don't worry, I'm sure we can keep you just as excited and enthused with the two of us. That's right. I was actually concerned about how to get Ed to get a word in, so this has made it simpler. Here with me today is author, playwright and journalist Van Badham. Hi, Van. Hi. Van has been a celebrated playwright for as long as I can remember, and now has an extraordinary career in the media. She's a regular columnist with The Guardian Australia and has written for The New York Times, The Age and many more respected and reputable media organisations.
And some really irreputable.
And I wanted to say that and just acknowledge, respectable, reputable media organisations is because that's not really what we're talking about today. What we understand about respectable and reputable is that, these are news organisations that have been around for decades or centuries. They actually try and find the truth and then tell the people about what they've found. So facts are discovered and unearthed and found when it comes to those sort of more legacy media organisations. But we're not talking about that today. We're going to be covering very dark territory for a Sunday morning. And I have to give you a bit of a content warning here. There'll be some fairly unavoidable, explicit and extremely violent references today. We actually can't avoid that, I would have to say. Van's book is called QAnon and On, a short and shocking history of internet conspiracy cults. Van, why do this book? How did you start going down this rabbit hole?
Okay, so for my sins, I live on the internet. And I live on the internet because I spent 10 years of my life living in London and pursuing my training and career as a playwright. And living in London, Twitter and Facebook were means by which I could stay a part of my community here at home. And so I was quite an early adopter and found communities on social media and political communities as well. Even though I've been a working playwright since I was 15, I somehow got distracted at university and went off and became a student politician. And my generation of student politicians are, of course, all in Parliament now, which is endlessly entertaining. And really, yes, certain things probably best left to the past, and how lucky they are there was no social media back then. But I always maintained those sort of political relationships. And when I did come back to Australia, more than 10 years ago now, and I was working for the Malthouse Theatre in Melbourne, I was suddenly part of the right, my sort of times aligned, and I was part of the daytime news cycle in Australia, commenting and whatever, which led to me getting a job at The Guardian. And you have to remember, I'm a theatre person. The theatre is a very loving place where the whole notion of criticism is really important. Like when we train at university to be playwrights and when we're in our emerging careers, we learn that criticism is like gold. You take it on board, you process it, it makes you a better artist. As my partner subsequently explained to me when I was like begging to get a therapist, losing my mind, being harassed on the internet all the time, he was like, yeah, these people who are saying mean things to you online, they don't want you to be a better artist, they want you to die. And I've been on quite a long personal journey learning how to process what it means to be in the public eye and to have a public life on the internet and be part of the very specific sort of political conversation. So I spent literally years trying to deal with the fact that like everybody I'd ever embarrassed myself in front of at a party when I was 17 was suddenly writing mean things about me to a public audience. But I was also attracting some extremely full-on content that I just couldn't imagine. Like I grew up in Sydney, I grew up in a really multicultural part of Sydney, and I had not seen the kind of horrendous extremist racism that I saw on the internet since the days of the old like National Front, who used to turn up and graffiti my school, you know, at various interludes when I was a kid. And I mean, I became really fascinated after I got the good therapist and developed some distancing strategies and realised it was not about me, but what I represented. I got really fascinated with the sort of dark world of trolling and what motivates people to do and say these like horrendous things. And please be aware, it extends offline. Like, I was stalked. I found myself trying to get intervention orders to get some of these people to leave me alone. I got bashed in the street of Melbourne one morning. I had packages of material sent to my house depicting gang rapes and genital mutilations. I developed quite like this extraordinary relationship with the local police station, where I was essentially logging all these things that were happening to me, not with the expectation that they could do anything, but the idea that there was a paper trail. So if I did get murdered, that maybe they could work backwards. Like, I mean, I had somebody, for a while I was working at the Malt House in Melbourne, and, you know, it's a theatre company, everybody's photos on the wall. It's quite a, you know, it's a public building, it's an accessible space. And someone we worked out must have followed me home from work, and they set up binoculars or a telescope or something, but they were at the multi-storey car park opposite my apartment, and they live tweeted what I was doing in my apartment on a Monday night. And that was, I mean, a little confronting for a person who knows all the songs to Oklahoma, and that had been sort of my professional experience. And so I wanted to know, like, I wanted to understand the psychology, and started doing things online to protect myself as well, where I would profile the people who attacked me. And I want everybody to be very clear on this. Like, it's not just obsessed neo-Nazis who write, you know, you should die. I have people who I know, like people who I knew back in the day, various people who I've had associations with.
Were they disguising themselves as well?
Not very well. I mean, I have developed a skill set in tearing back people's anonymity. Like, I can always find out who someone is now. And using my theatre training and, you know, all the things that I've been trained in building characters. And, well, if you can build a character, you can deconstruct a character as well and find people. And I keep files on people who attack me, and because I've been subjected to violence and harassment, and it's a self-protection mechanism.
So in 2013, you started working as a columnist for The Guardian Australia, and that sort of, you know, that was sort of a point at which you very much became a focus of online trolls and things like that. But you also wrote a piece, "If your friends and family have fallen for an internet conspiracy cult, here is what you should do." So what happened after that?
So in 2017, and this is where my life starts to dovetail with what the book is about. Even before that, 2015, 2016, these strange things started happening to me online, like beyond just the crazy trolling and things. Around 2015, 2016, I started getting these sort of waves of hatred that were extreme and with like hundreds of comments at a time. I'm an activist, I'm very involved in social justice causes, I'm obviously a very public feminist and trade unionist. And I was doing the most innocuous things, like I was doing a fundraiser for the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre and filmed a little video of going, "Hey everybody, if you don't want, you know, refugees from war-torn countries to starve to death in Australia, how about you give us some money?" You know, like happy content. And I got thousands of messages and I'll give you an example. One of them was, "I hope you get raped until your body disintegrates. You deserve to die, you communist whore." That was one of the more innocuous comments. They were infinitely worse. These like intense descriptions of how my body would be mutilated and things. And I remember getting those. I was in a hotel room in Queensland doing like a trade union conference like the day after this fundraiser, and was just getting these waves of hatred. And then there was, infamously, I was on Q&A with a shock jock called Steve Price. Maybe you've heard of him, maybe you haven't. In 2016, and he was like famously misogynistic towards me, and I sort of slapped him with a one-liner. And the hate that came after me was extraordinary. It was like 1,000 people in an hour talking about how I should be murdered. And it got to the point where my partner was like, enough, I can't deal with this. We're going to go to Thailand and, well, I'll just max out the credit cards. We're going to go to Thailand. We'll stay in a resort for a week and we'll just pretend this isn't happening. We'll put your phone in the safe so you can't check it. And we were out at dinner and we're in Thailand and I'm trying to calm down. And all of a sudden, his phone started exploding. And it was our friends frantically calling him. And it turned out that my Twitter account had been hacked by someone and they were sending racially abusive messages to my closest personal friends and pumping out porn from my Twitter account unbelievable. So there we are in Thailand trying to get away from this and it had followed us. And it was 2 o'clock in the morning in Australia and I was it was 2 o'clock in the morning in England. I can't remember how the time difference worked. But I was phoning like the head of Twitter, like I had to phone the Guardian going, you have to help me. I don't know what to do. I can't get into my Twitter account. I can't stop these messages. They're going to thousands of people. And phoning Twitter, like screaming and crying, going, you have to do something, you have to do something. And I couldn't work out what was going on. Like, how had I attracted all of this hatred? Well, it turned out that I had been targeted by a website called 4chan. 4chan is an infamous sort of Wild West website where anyone can just start posting and you don't need to register, they don't need an email, you literally just turn up and you start putting words in and it's completely anonymous. And you can say whatever you like and to whoever you want. And in this forum, it has developed a culture of overwhelmingly men competing against one another to be as disgusting as possible. And 4chan, who are based all over the world, lots of Americans, but lots of Swedes and Norwegians and Canadians and guys in Algeria, you know, they had found this image of me humiliating Steve Price, which, by the way, he completely deserved. And this was so offensive to the anti-feminists on this website that they picked me as a target and they drove this attack. And that's how I found myself in a hotel room in Thailand with somebody sending out porn from my Twitter account. And I became aware, like, increasingly that I was one of a number of women who had been identified as, you know, enemies of the boys on 4chan, like women who had, and this is, my book goes into detail, copped it far worse than I had. People like Anita Sarkeesian, who was a feminist games academic, and Brianna Wu, who was a feminist game designer, and Zoe Quinn, another feminist game designer, who had offended the values of these men on this website and had been subjected to the most unbelievable harassment.
So your book obviously is about QAnon, but it goes into the origins of QAnon as well. Let's just address the very basic question. Who is Q?
So QAnon is 4chan culture, and this is why this lead up is important.
And 4chan being, again, that online forum that Van was just talking about.
Yeah, where the boys are, where these horrible, horrible men and boys are who drive these attacks. So they hang out on this website, and in 2017, someone starts posting, and it's all anonymous, going, Hillary Clinton is going to be arrested in a few days. And she's going to be taken to Guantanamo Bay and there will be extraditions and it's all of her conspirators are going to be rounded up. And it is nonsense, right? It is a total nonsense story. Clearly, it is now 2022. Hillary Clinton, strangely enough, still not in jail, still not in Guantanamo. The Trump era has come and fortunately, thank you, God Almighty, has temporarily ended. What happens on 4chan is this post appears, and on 4chan they play games, just as the targeting and harassment of feminists is a game. These obscene things that they put out into the world, it's all a game. This is a website where people photograph their bowel movements. You know, it's men competing with other men to see how disgusting they can be. And of course that attracts people who benefit from no censorship, like white supremacists and like intense racists and very, very anti-Semitic neo-Nazi people go to that website because they can say anything. And at some point, irony doesn't matter anymore. If you're saying something racist, it doesn't matter if you're ironic or not. What happens is this account that starts talking about Hillary Clinton, the boys on 4chan all start playing along. Oh yeah, well I've got insider information, this is definitely going to happen, and my friend works for the FBI and he says this is going to happen, and this is all, you know, it's a game. They're all participating in it. But what happens is these posts keep coming because they're encouraging one another, you know. And a woman whose name is Tracy Diaz, who calls herself Tracy Beans online, who hangs out, she's in the far right in America, she's a light in the eyes Trump supporter, and she does like this small-time conspiracy theory YouTube channel, which is basically her going, yeah, so I think the government is up to something, you know, and I think it could be really bad, and I think like maybe the globalists have something to do with it, like it's amateur hour kind of stuff. She hooks up with a couple of guys who suggest that these posts about Hillary Clinton could be real. They could be really real. And maybe the person who's posting them is a secret agent. And the person who's posting these accounts starts calling themselves Q clearance patriot. A Q clearance is a really obscure Secret Service clearance in America that's actually for people who work in nuclear power. So it's not really appropriate anyway. They're all playing along. And Tracy and her friends start a Reddit community on another website to talk about what these posts could mean and what the evidence are and what the clues in them are. Because if you're a secret agent who's releasing government secrets, you definitely do it on 4chan. Like. Anyway, and she starts making YouTube videos where she's like, you know, there could be something in this. This is really like frightening stuff. Yeah, you know. And it dovetails into all these other sort of conspiracies that have been happening on the internet. And they create this community. And that's when the Russian government steps in and 4,000 Russian government-aligned accounts start promoting Tracy's Reddit community and start promoting Tracy's YouTube. And of course, all these different parts of the internet start speaking to one another. Tracy has a very different audience to the kind of guys who hang out on 4chan. And, you know, there's a different audience on YouTube and a different one on the Reddit website and a different one. And they're all speaking about this theory. And what happens is it grows and the account starts publishing more and more of these accounts. And the community around, because everybody on 4chan is anonymous, people who are participating in this sort of game start calling this community QAnon. So whoever's posting, he, she, could be anyone, starts doing these posts, and that's what the community is called.
And they really are obscure. They're really oblique, that's probably the better word, posts. Like, a lot of the Q posts are basically just asking a whole bunch of rhetorical questions, right?
Oh, they're amazing. They're like going to see, you know, your sort of, you know, like small town psychic. I feel that there's been great upset in your life. There seems to be something you haven't said to your mother. You know, that kind of, they used to call it cold reading, like the art of cold reading, where and it's, yes, oh my God, that's true. And these posts are these rolling rhetorical questions that Tracy's community, and this community explodes on Reddit. Suddenly they've got like 100,000 followers of people trying to sort of parse and analyse these clues.
And how is this related to a pedophile ring?
So, this is where it gets really dark. So there is
guys.
this is what my book is about. Like this book, I hosted an interview with Hannah Kent at the Naughty Noodle the other night, and it was one of the most beautiful gigs I've ever done. She's a wonderful novelist. Her books are great. You should buy them. And if anybody is here because they were like, oh, that was such a lovely evening, my book is not like that.
Sorry.
And it is not, if you're here for the Hannah Kent experience, buy Hannah's book, because this is not what's happening. So what happens is all of these different conspiracy theories start to be absorbed, because whoever is posting this Q stuff is trying to maintain the audience. And Tracy Beans and her like creepy friends and the Russians and all of these other, we call them bad faith actors, they need more and more content in order to keep this community interested. What starts happening is a phenomenon that I talk about in my book called conspiracy entrepreneurialism, where Tracy starts soliciting donations to pay for her videos. Right? So they're all
a lot of money, right?
Yeah. I mean, she makes a living from people paying her to go, yeah, this is really frightening stuff, you know. And so the posts keep coming. And the story sort of starts to develop where they start absorbing all of these other conspiracy theories that have lived on the internet for some time and lived in the community for a very long time. There is a 2,500-year-old conspiracy theory that evil people who are not like us, who have a religion that we don't share, and this transports all over the world, raping and eating children in underground tunnels. The Romans used this very successfully to persecute Jews, so did the Nazis. And it has inherently become an anti-Semitic myth. Jews are secretly lizards, and the lizards are coming to eat your children. And there's an existing conspiracy theory about lizard people in the United States, that lizards have come from outer space and they look like us, and the Queen is a lizard. And it's actually based in the old anti-Semitic myth, but for a long time, you know, after the Second World War, you couldn't really be overtly anti-Semitic. Strangely enough, that lesson had been sort of conclusively learned. And you have a community of people who don't realise that it's a euphemism, who have just invested in the lizard people. And all of these communities exist on the internet. Like, the internet means anyone can find one another. And Q starts absorbing this stuff, specifically this myth that Hillary Clinton is a witch, and Hillary Clinton has been devouring children in satanic rituals to keep herself youthful by drinking the blood of innocents in the basement of a pizza restaurant in Washington, DC. And
in a restaurant that doesn't have a basement?
In a restaurant that doesn't have a basement. I was found out in 2016 when a young man called Edgar Madison Welch, who was, you know, sort of a guy going through some personal issues, who's from North Carolina, loads his car up with guns and decides he's going to liberate, because he's heard about these conspiracies online. He drives to this pizza restaurant where, in one of those extraordinary coincidences, one of my friends is with her children that day, and she goes next door to buy some books at the bookstore and comes out and there are cops everywhere and there's a man on the ground, because he had gone in and shot up the restaurant looking for the basement that Hillary Clinton was eating children in. And this gets absorbed into this QAnon story.
So that is one of the real world examples. It's known as Pizzagate, and amazingly he didn't kill anyone that day. But that there are many fatalities that have actually resulted from the QAnon and other conspiracies, and 4chan as well. Do you want to talk about the Christchurch killer?
Yeah, well, this is the thing. So you have these communities online where people start, and QAnon is just an example of the phenomenon. The people who are getting this supposed secret agent to send them, you know, who do these public posts of secret government information, sounds very legit. But these people become obsessed with it. And fundamentally the problem is that the internet allows you to fuel your fantasies and your biases. And this is true for everyone, and this is what is really dangerous. There are some really great things about how the internet has blown open old cultural gatekeeping. And I'm an example of that. Like, I'm a feminist, you know, I'm a trade union person, I went to state school, I went to the University of Wollongong, I am a large bogan. Like, people like me didn't used to get media jobs in Australia, let alone as columnists, you know, but I had a big following on the internet before I even started working, because people want to know amazingly, there are a lot of bogans who want to know what bogans think about stuff. And I'm into that. I'm more than happy to speak to bogans about bogan issues, you know. And that's been one of the great things that the internet has done, and especially like looking at all of these feminists who've created these huge platforms speaking to women about women's issues. We've seen, like, the fact that Grace Tame is one of the most powerful, influential voices in Australia is extraordinary. And that's happened because she bypassed the media. You know, she literally took reporting standards to court and won, and created a space to have a conversation about survivorship and all those things. The internet makes that possible. But the internet also creates communities where you can just edit out things that you don't want to believe and facts that you don't like. And it's a shame that Ed isn't here and has coronavirus. I mean, that's the biggest shame. Because Ed's great, and Ed's book, Facts and Other Lies, talks about the actual mechanics of how these communities are created online. It's really, really good. But what I became very aware of when I was researching my book is that people believe what they want to believe, and they go looking for systems that will justify it. So in the case of the Christchurch mass murderer, he was a troubled guy from Australia, and most of these guys are from actually a pretty similar background, where they're not bogans, they're not an oppressed underclass. They're generally and overwhelmingly middle class kids and young adults and older who are disaffected, who feel that the world hasn't given them what they feel entitled to, whether it's love from girls and attention or positions of power and influence. A lot of the abuse I get online, when it first began, I was like, these are 17-year-old boys who can't get dates and they hate me. It turned out they were 55-year-old men who had middle management jobs, who wanted to be rock guitarists and were just taking their tension out on whoever who got more attention than they did. And what happens is they're already sort of prepped to be radicalised, because you can go on the internet and look for things. You can look for propaganda to tell you Hillary Clinton is a lizard person from outer space who eats babies. And people will form a community and go, yeah, that bitch, that lizard bitch, yeah, someone should do something about her. Someone should take her out. And they start planning and they start cooking this stuff up. The Christchurch killer strapped a camera to his head as he was murdering unarmed people to show off in front of his Islamophobic racist mates. And he had found a community that encouraged that. And that manifesto he wrote a manifesto, it circulated online, and it was on 4chan, 8chan, and 8chan is an even worse, because 4chan eventually started to regulate, and people didn't like it. So they created a new website, 8chan, which had no rules at all, absolutely none. And that's where this sort of extremist material is available. You can sit down, you can be anyone, you can be a 13-year-old kid and find 8chan, which is now called 8kun, and find this disgusting stuff. And this is the thing, if you're looking for it, it is there, and it'll give you a worldview and a bunch of people who will encourage you to do unimaginable things.
And I think you've got a lot of quotes from the internet, from the horrible sites, and also from sort of Facebook. I thought one quote that sort of illustrates that point was from a Fox News consumer on Facebook. So they were commenting on a Fox News post. I'd rather receive false information and keep my conservative views than receive true information and follow a socialistic agenda.
Yeah. Yeah, that sort of sums it up. That's what's going on. And it was a really interesting experience. So the story of the book was that I was onto the QAnon thing really early because I live on the internet and because I'd been, a minor 4chan celebrity for 5 minutes. And various things I post, about industrial relations or feminism, whatever. And I started getting the regular abuse, as we call it in our house, a day ending in Y. But there was sort of a new tone to it. So around late 2017, early 2018, and this is when QAnon is just beginning, I start getting these really sort of apocalyptic messages about how, the day is coming, and it's sort of Judgment Day stuff, like, there will be a great awakening. And I'm like, what on earth is this? Like, what is this new flavour of awful that is crossing my path? And sort of kept an eye on it and noticed some reporting was coming out of America, and it seemed to be an evolution on this Pizzagate thing. And the reporters in America were describing this QAnon phenomenon, and I was like, oh, this is what I've been targeted by. Like, this is what's happening. And I started talking about it online and sort of sharing these American articles, and wrote this piece for The Guardian, which was about if somebody you love is in a conspiracy cult, this is what you should do. Because of course what happens by 2020, we're all in lockdown, and a lot of very suddenly vulnerable and distressed people are online looking for answers, trying to comprehend how all of a sudden the whole world is different and no one's allowed to go outside and everybody's homeschooling their kids and people have lost jobs and we don't know what will happen next and the virus will kill you and people are dying but you can't see them because everybody's locked down. And it just exploded. And this stuff that I'd sort of been keeping an eye on was everywhere. And because I was writing about it, hundreds of people in my social media communities, people who follow me on Facebook, were writing to me going, my cousin, my uncle, my best friend, they are going mad and telling me about lizard people and Hillary Clinton and the Twin Towers and all of this conspiracy stuff. And I just don't know what to do. And it seemed that there was an audience for a book that would take apart these mythologies and look at where this stuff was coming from. And Hardy Grant approached me and said, look, we've read your article, we'd really like you to do a book. And then it got really scary because in order to do the book, I had to meet these people. So I went undercover and hid in the community and pretended to be a QAnon person. And yeah, it was weeks of nightmares, weeks and weeks of nightmares.
See, that's really, that's really, really hard to do that. I mean, I've known about this stuff for a few years, but I've tried to avoid it as much as possible because it's so horrible. How does it feel to, would you have to also participate in hate?
Well, I had some very clear rules because obviously I am an ethical person and I won't participate in hate, but I had sort of studied the community and knew enough from the people who had contacted me because QAnon believers are very evangelical. They want you to believe because they fundamentally know it's not true, but they have this sense that if they can recruit you into believing that it's true, it will become more true to them. You know, and if this sounds like other cult movements, I mean, this is why I use the term cult. It is exactly, it's a cult. It behaves like a cult. It does culty things with culty people who cult around. That is literally what's happening. And because I've always been interested in cults because I had a couple of ex-boyfriends who were cult survivors and who were desperately traumatised as adults from things that had happened to them as children. And I found that the whole psychology and behaviour and ritual around cult practice was something I'd had to deal with in intimate relationships, which was really confronting. So I used the networks that I had to sort of pinpoint where these conversations were happening online, and I used my theatre skills to create a bunch of characters and sort of prodded until I was accepted into various communities, you know, constructing different characters, using different keywords. But I was very careful. I never participated in hate. I never shared anything that was untrue. Like I was very clear about not being part of an ecosystem. But even just being a character in those conversations, saying things like, wow, you can't believe it, wow, really? Ooh, gee. I attracted these individuals who wanted to befriend me and bring me in further. And in many cases, some of my male personas met a lot of really lonely women who were trying to form romantic relationships with this invented person on the internet, which was really uncomfortable. And I found myself in situations where I had done nothing to encourage intimacy, and yet people wanted to give it to me. And it really made me realise how these cults are like any cults ever. There's an emotional need in various people that is not being filled in their lives. They're in distress, they're experiencing chaos, they're lonely, they're frightened. And there are opportunists who will feed them all the fantasies that they want to think that they can, you know, get better and reconnect without having to do the work.
And I think at the heart of this book too, and this is probably where, again, your theatre background comes into it, but I think there's an extraordinary compassion for a lot of these people that end up getting caught up in these conspiracy theories, including, you know, you talk about one of the women who ended up, you know, storming the Capitol, Washington, D.C., and how she got there and how she died while she was there.
Yeah, I mean, and I ended up developing, because I was in the community and part of their conversations and seeing who they really were, like, I developed what I described as cold empathy. Like, I could feel really sorry for them intellectually and go, you are caught up in something that is beyond you, it is endangering you, it is harming the people who care about you. But I have no sympathy because the answers to your problem are obvious and you are ignoring them. And so it was a really interesting place to be in, because I've done undercover work before. So I did a play called Banging Denmark that was about pickup artists, and I went undercover in the pickup artist community, pretending to be a man online and learning techniques for picking up girls, and it was fascinating. And I genuinely felt sorry for those guys because they're looking for love and they're lonely and they're dorky and awkward and they want someone to give them a magic girls like you pill. And I also went undercover in the Hillsong Church for a year. I did a musical about Hillsong. Yeah, it had some banging tunes, let me tell you. And I did evangelical drag. I was a pastor called Fanny Comfort. There are videos online. And I developed a lot of genuine empathy for a lot of Hillsong people who had found like a profound sense of fellowship and connection and looking for community. And despite the fact that Hillsong do, some frankly disgusting things, and homophobic and transphobic and not nice to women, and the litany of sexual abuse and the rest of it. There are very valid criticisms of that particular movement, but the people I met, like a lot of ordinary parishioners, needed that community and needed that sense of cohesion and so there was like a sympathy there, even though they were doing unpleasant things. It was the same with the pickup artists. But with the QAnon people, it was just not there. I was like, you are dangerous. You are participating in extremely volatile stuff, and there is no genuine there's no genuine person here. There's a lot of lies that you're telling to yourselves. And it was really confronting. It was really, really difficult to spend time with them. And just so you know, when the anti-lockdown protests were happening last year in Melbourne, and a lot of them were violent, and various other things that happened, anything that I could do to help out arresting people who I were like, they're going to bomb a building, I passed on. Because it was, they hype it all up, and they have consumed so much propaganda. There are people who genuinely believe in this pedophile cabal, eating children, drinking blood. And once you're at the point where you've accepted that, you can justify any act of violence to yourself.
What's interesting about that too, and which I definitely got from the book, was that these are people looking for a sense of, they're looking for values, they're looking for worth. They enjoy the feeling that maybe they're the heroes, that maybe they can save the world from this horrible pedophile ring and cannibal, eating children.
Yeah,
and they're the heroes. That's why they're a part of it.
This is why the class analysis is so fascinating, because the left got the whole Trump thing very wrong. And they got it wrong because a lot of, public people in the left are not bogans, and, very superior moral people who just know more than everybody else. And this is what I mean. Part of the process of writing the book was me interrogating the spaces and communities that I participate in, and the fact that if I received a tweet from someone that confirmed a view I already had, I usually passed it on. And writing the book made me really go, hang on, you can't trust anyone, and the person you should trust least of all is yourself. You have to focus on things that you don't want to believe are true. You have to stare into the mirror and see the capacity for manipulation and propaganda in yourself. That's actually really important, and especially because I have a media platform, and the kind of fact-checking that I do with the work that I publish and take very seriously. I have to bring that to every encounter I had. And after I wrote the book, I made a point of engaging more with pro-democracy conservatives online, conservative intellectuals and people who held different political beliefs to my own, because it's important that we all stay in a conversation with one another, even if it's unpleasant, even if I find some of those beliefs really offensive. It's really important to have that constant check on bias. And of course, yeah, it's a really confronting experience to look into that and go, we are in a situation where people can just choose to avoid truth entirely, and there are people making money from encouraging that. And there has to be a commitment to us in building up public institutions, rebuilding trust, rooting out corruption, rooting out lies, destroying propaganda.
And the thing about that, right, and it's also explored in Ed Coper's book, is that you actually, to just address this problem with facts is not necessarily going to work.
Well, this is the thing. One of the reasons why I kept going with the book, and can I just be really honest, there were times where I was like, I can't do this anymore. This is just so awful. These people are awful. The things they're doing are awful. I will confess, is the working title for the book, do forgive my language, I was in an emotionally vulnerable place, was the worst fucking people doing the worst fucking shit imaginable. And my partner got to the point where he was like, I will do all the cooking and all the cleaning if you do not talk to me about your book until it's published. Because I was just perpetually in tears and telling him all of these horrible stories. And there was one story in particular, like this, and it's in the book, and it's like a paragraph, but it took me sort of 4 days to research it and get all the facts in order. And I was just, and it involves like the mistreatment of a young girl. And I was just sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. And I just lost all faith in humanity. I was like, we are completely doomed. And his position was, one person in this household has to not lose their mind. And I think it will help if I'm not having nightmares because you are having them every night, kind of thing. And it was really difficult. But what sort of, I pushed through to the end because so many people had contacted me about this going on in their families and was so confounding. And this is my point about how a lot of people in the left got it so wrong. That Trump was like a bogan movement, and the stereotype of the Trump voter is a displaced working class person who might have lost their job at the local auto manufacturer when jobs got outsourced. And we were told this again and again and again. The single largest determinant of whether you are a Trump voter is being a member of a homeowners association. This is a very middle class movement, and we know from the arrest records of people who went to January 6th that they were teachers and doctors and lawyers and small business owners and people who had the money. Like, if you're working class in America, you do not get paid enough to fly down to Washington, stay at the Hilton and write against the government on a weekend. Like, you don't have those. And that picture of that couple, I think they're in Missouri with their guns, like, protecting their house. Like, they're lawyers. You should see the inside of their house. They've got Grecian columns and all of this nonsense. And this is your point about people wanting to play hero. You know, you have a sociologist in the United States calls them the lumpen bourgeoisie. Like, these are people who have done materially very well, but they're not happy, and it's not enough. It's not enough to have money. It's not enough to have, you know, local influence or local power. They do want to be part of this story. They want to be heroes and patriots and, you know, Paul Revere, and they absorb all of this propaganda that positions them as like these holy warriors against this evil, and that, you know, this great awakening that will happen when Hillary Clinton is arrested and the show trials begin, and, you know, is going to be, it's really crazy, narcissistic fantasy stuff, and it's like a role-playing game, except they are genuinely willing to kill people. And one of the things that happened, like, and this was when the book came out, I mean, thank you, you know, Radical Right, for your anti-lockdown protest, because my book got a huge audience on release. Just the timing just sort of worked out that way, which is a dark realisation. But a lot of those people who were participating in these protests here, because I was in groups with them, like, you know, I had these fake friendships with these real people. They were small business owners, and they were people who ran massage studios. One of the women who I interviewed in my book, who's a really old friend of mine, for those of you who read the book, it's a woman called Michelle, she was a cult. She'd been in a cult before and was very damaged by it and had almost completely trashed her life and managed to get it back together. And she was in a yoga group where the yoga guru went completely bonkers and made, you know, the insistence that Hillary Clinton was a lizard person like a condition of remaining in his yoga class.
And where was this again? This was in...
Yeah, this is in Brisbane.
Yeah, and Brisbane.
Yeah, and I found Michelle's story, because Michelle, who's married to a guy I went to high school with, she called me after my piece came out, my first piece about this came out in The Guardian, and told me this insane story. And she was like, I'm telling you, Van, because we're bogans, she was like, I'm telling you, Van, it is everywhere. It's yoga. It's like local massage person. And I was just like, what is going on in Brisbane? Well, it's not just Brisbane. It's everywhere. And I reached out to some friends who are in the wellness community, like a friend of mine who's a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner. I was like, is this happening? And she was like, Van, I have been shunned. She's like, I'm in a group of wellness practitioners, you know, who hang out in Melbourne, and it's happening here, and it's happening everywhere, and I'll introduce you to some other people. And during lockdowns, this stuff was rife through the wellness community in Australia. And in my research, I found out it was also happening in Germany. That's how it got in, was through the wellness community. In America, it's got in a sort of different way. But you had these groups of people where these sociological dynamics start happening, where it's an insistence that this is the thing. And of course, it's, you know, romantic to think you're the one who's going to fight to bring down great evil. And the guy who got into his car to shoot up the pizza restaurant, I mean, he shot a video about how he was willing to sacrifice his life to save these children that didn't exist, you know.
So we're nearly at the end, and I also want to open it up to questions when we can. But just just, is there any hope? So what would you recommend? What
Well,
would you
yeah, I
recommend
mean,
if people's friends are getting involved in this kind of...
Well, I mean, I really, fundamentally, I wrote the book for Michelle because she had already been through this once and had almost destroyed her life, and this was just another manifestation of it. And for all the people who had written to me, like I was putting questions on Facebook saying, have you encountered this? I got 600 responses in 24 hours because it can destroy families, and there are communities online. And of course, in the book I interview Karen Stewart, whose brother Tim was the subject of the Four Corners investigation, who was Scott Morrison's best friend, who was pumping out QAnon material while he was house sitting Kirribilli House. No problem. No security risk there, anyone. And I interviewed Karen. Karen and her parents ended up shopping her brother to the Australian Federal Police because they had become convinced he was a security risk, and his proximity to the Prime Minister was terrifying. The then Prime Minister was terrifying. And so these, people want to know what to do. And I interviewed clinical psychologists and cult experts and all kinds of different people to look at how it's sort of an individual distress becomes a social problem. And the way, in the book, there are a lot of strategies for how to bring people back. But the worst thing you can do is argue facts and reason, because somebody who wants to think that Hillary Clinton is a lizard, facts and reason didn't get them to that conclusion, it's not going to get them out of it.
And so, I think, it's sort of recommended, and Ed Cope talks about it as well, it's like, actually the only thing you can do is just to spend time with people in a reasonable fashion. Don't even have to talk about
Go
it.
bowling.
Go
The best
bowling.
thing you can do is go bowling. Because bowling's really social, it's really fun, you can't have a political conversation. And if somebody starts on the, Hillary Clinton's really a lizard, you can go, is it your turn? I think it's your turn.
Exactly. All right. Now, do we have a floating mic for questions? Yeah. Okay. So there's one up the front here. Sorry. Just there's somebody else first, and then we'll get to you.
Hello?
That's it. Very good.
Unfortunately, I have to flag what might be the new area of their working, these weird people. A friend of mine's Ukrainian, and she sent me stuff that not a lot of people get, and I only pass on what I think is useful. Anyway, through answering a couple of questions of people that I thought were okay, I've had Russian people death threat me twice, and so I'm wondering if that's going to be the next area.
They're way ahead of you. Way ahead of you. We're right in it. So, because I've kept all my personas alive, they're all still hanging out on the internet, speaking to all the believers. We have gone from we've gone from Hillary Clinton is a lizard to Bill Gates is putting chips in us so we'll all turn into 5G towers, to the war in Ukraine is a noble war of the great Russian people against Nazis. And that's happened very quickly. And it's happened because the Russian government has spent years investing traditional old Soviet-style disinformation campaigning into these conspiracy communities because they're politically useful to the interests of authoritarian Russia and Putinism. That has been happening. And I go into detail in the book about the very close relationship between the Russian government and Steve Bannon, who was Trump's advisor. And this isn't secret, like these are public relationships. Steve Bannon goes to Russia, hangs out with a neo-fascist philosopher called Alexander Dugin, who is a great advisor to Putin, and there's a concerted political movement that serves the interests of Putin's Russia that is attached to all of this stuff. The Russians use it, and I interviewed an extraordinary woman called Nina Yankovic, who's a disinformation scholar from the United States, who was based in Ukraine for a long time, helping the Ukrainian government defend itself against disinformation campaigning by the Russians, and advised in that capacity and worked in Estonia, quite extraordinary woman. And she's like, the Russian government don't generate the narratives unless they're directly involved, like what's happening in Ukraine. they look at what's going on in these communities and sort of use them to message test and find issues that they can then promote through all of their fake internet properties and their propaganda channels as if to it's something that will get purchase. And they were there from the beginning. 4 days into these very first QAnon posts appearing on 4chan, they were amplifying Tracy Beans, who was American, who had no idea. Like, frankly, I don't think poor old Tracy has many ideas of her own, really. But yeah, something could be going on. Yes, Tracy, you are a puppet of a Russian disinformation campaign. That is exactly what is going on. Like, they seize on these sort of organic movements and they amplify them and promote them in order to create division. Because think about it, the invasion of Ukraine didn't come out of nowhere. Ukraine is an ally of the United States, you know, the most armed nation on the earth. While you have an America that is so chaotic and divided and creating these polarising political narratives that has a group of Trump supporters attack the Capitol building and people dying and fights with police, that's a United States that can't provide the traditional allyship to Ukraine that it would. In the context of the invasion of Ukraine, it is very clear that because, I mean, the Russians have amplified stuff around Marine Le Pen in France, the Russians have amplified the crazy wellness people in Germany who, there was a mass murder attributed to QAnon believers there. Like, the powerful Western allies who should be in a position to wargame what's going on in Ukraine, to look at, you know, the geopolitical context of Russian aggression, have been distracted with these ongoing internal problems, and we had them here. Like, we absolutely had them here. And that influence is, you know, bad faith actors can be governments, they can be corporations, and they're using those systems in the internet in order to attack our democracies and cause trouble.
We have a question.
Actually, I have more than one question, but one of the things is, how do you cope with that weight of trolling? Has it got worse since you published this? And the second one is, do you think that the internet's going to get much worse, or Twitter's going to get much worse with trolling once Elon Musk takes over?
Elon Musk is a Bond villain, and I think he is. He's a Bond villain. What about that man is not a Bond villain? Like, I've seen all the Bond movies. He's literally building rockets. Like, that's Moonraker. Like, you can find a Bond villain in literally everything he does. He's not a fit and proper person to own a media company. Like, there is no way he should be entrusted with Twitter. He is a bad and immoral actor whose personal behaviour is disgusting. And it is really terrifying that he's going to take ownership of Twitter. Is trolling going to get worse? Yes, because he's a free speech absolutist, like most extremely rich white men who think there should be absolutely no limits on their behaviour. Are there things we can do about it? Yes, we can regulate the hell out of it. We can pump money into public broadcasters. We can defend the ABC as if our lives depended on it. And that's the kind of stuff we should do. We should also, absolutely, and how wonderful to have a government that is absolutely positively committed with a crossbench in support of federal ICAC. That will make a huge difference in this country. Because it rebuilds trust. Anti-corruption measures rebuild trust in public institutions that are therefore a bulwark against disinformation campaigning. That's really important. In terms of what it's done to me, this is important. I have had a complete personality change. I am not the person who I was 10 years ago. I was a very sort of cuddly, lovely, trust everybody theatre person who told wild stories at night and had a good time. I'm now extremely guarded about my personal relationships. I don't trust anyone apart from people who I already have established relationships with. I just block people. I'm not interested in conversations with people who conform to a pattern that I've seen before. And I just have to be different. Because my work, I flatter myself my work is important, and because I am from a large community in the population that is of state school educated people from working class communities who are not represented in the media, and I am going to continue to represent the interests of my community, and I will not be bullied off the internet by anyone. But that has come at an enormous personal cost. I had to leave my house. You know, we had to make very different arrangements about how we live our lives. I effectively live in a fortress, and that's the price. My friend Nina, the disinformation scholar, was given a job in the Biden administration to advise on disinformation, and is currently under FBI protection because she has literally had a baby yesterday, and she had these crazy QAnon lunatics threatening her life and bomb threats and the rest of it. Like, you know, it's not getting better, but the fight is growing more important. And until we can put the bulwarks in place to protect our democracy and protect access, personal sacrifices are going to be demanded. You know, and I never thought that I'd have to make a decision about, am I going to leave my home and live in a fortress and totally change the way I lead my life? But, you know, if that means I can still continue talking about industrial relations from a pro-union left-wing position in a paper of note, well, I guess that's the trade-off.
I think we have, yes. That's a really good place to end it. I'm really sorry. I know we had one more question, but I think we're sort of out of time. But thank you very much for joining us, and thank you, Van, for sharing your story.